Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about vigilante justice. We're going to be talking about a reformed criminal, and we're going to talk about integrating lore, how you do that, when you do that, why you do that, here on Rise of the GM. Well, hey, Adam.
Hey.
It's good to be here with you today. If you guys are now watching this on March 21st, you will know that like several weeks ago, a couple weeks ago, we tried to do this as a live recording that would post later, and you heard all of that intro, and then we realized that we were actually live, and someone jumped on, Wataya Hotel jumped on, and we saw that, so we're like, oh, we better end that. And so now today, we are here, and so we have told you the last couple weeks that we are going to be pre-recording 3 episodes because I'm going on sabbatical, and so we were going to drop those just to let you know that if you're on here now, and you are watching, you can drop comments, and Adam will probably be on here as it's going live, and he can chat with you in that. But we may not like pick up on what you're saying right here, right now, and like talk about it in this episode because this one's pre-recorded. But definitely do get on and leave your chats and your comments and your thoughts because Adam will be present. He is not on sabbatical, unfortunately, right, Adam?
True.
And so he will be here. And I will read all these beautiful things when I get back. Who knows? I could be somewhere even watching. What?
Yeah.
That would be crazy. But anyway, so this one, we're going to not probably do our haversack at the end of this one, but we're going to do the things we usually do, our encounter starter. We're gonna hit that and then head to our main topic, and we'll finish off with an NPC. But our encounter starter today is one called Vigilante. It's about vigilante justice. It's called Spreading Poison. And so I'm going to read this, and then we're going to talk a little bit about this and jump into it. So what you have here is a corrupt City Watch captain has been running a, quote, protection racket, right? Shaking down merchants and then administering savage beatings if they don't pay up. Recently, a merchant rebuffed this captain's cronies, turning down their offer of protection. And in retaliation, they beat the man's wife to death. Dark, right? The merchant is now out for vengeance against the corrupt captain, as well as the watch as a whole for not bringing the captain to justice. Though he's not an apothecary himself, he's adept at poisons, and he's begun poisoning watch members. So you as, or them as the PCs, they don't know any of this. Okay, this is just giving you the background. Going on, says there have been several poisonings already, and if there are too many more, the city will find itself in a crisis with not nearly enough watch personnel to keep the peace. So there's not going to be enough guards. No apparent motive for these crimes, and no connections between the watchmen. Many are well respected. None were involved in the killing of the merchant's wife. Additional deaths can be used as the GM. You can use those to modulate kind of the pace of the adventure, how fast this goes, how quickly it takes off, giving the PCs breathing room as they need it, or raising the stakes. The adventure opens with an investigation. So this is where you would actually start kind of this encounter. It opens with an investigation of a crime scene. Cause of the death is obvious, as is the vector. The watchman's dinner is sitting there. PCs can bring a sample of that to the apothecary, and of course, he identifies poison in it. Turns out to be a rare and highly illegal poison, calling all apothecaries in the city into suspicion because only apothecaries would probably have this kind of poison. Visiting a few of their shops will turn up an apothecary who has recently disappeared. And what they will find out later is the merchant bought poisons from this apothecary in secret, and as soon as he saw how it was being used, he fled the city because he knew it would be traced back to him. Clues in his shop lead the PCs to the guilty merchant, and when the party arrives on the street, they see the captain, this bad captain, and his thugs shaking down another shop a few doors down. They confront the watchman, and they're warned off, right? They say, you just back off. This is none of your business. A fight may break out, but fighting the watch should have consequences, so you as GM can decide what those are. When the PCs meet the merchant, he breaks down pretty quickly and confesses to his crimes. He pleads with them to see that his side of the story is is understood, and that they help him with that, help him bring the captain to justice, even if it means that he himself will be executed for his crimes. And, he's heartbroken over what happened to his wife. He doesn't even care about his own life anymore, but he wants to see this guy brought to justice. The nature of the finale will depend on your group, but in general, usually good aligned groups will want to see justice served across the board, right? Exposing the captain will force the watch to punish him for his crimes. He'll have to be taken care of, because you can't just allow that sort of thing in the city. But it will also reveal corruption further up the chain of command, which could lead to further adventures. So there's the situation. And what's interesting about this one is that they allow, or what I would like about this, we kind of talk about how we would adapt this and put this into a campaign we're using. I'll start off by saying that I like this one could have a slow start. So the opening scene is they're at a crime scene with this poison food. Well, that's the opening scene that your PCs are actually involved in. I like the idea of some kind of a watchman is dead, and you just hear rumors of it. Maybe the town criers are talking about it, that we talked about several weeks ago.
Yeah, right.
But then a little later, another watchman dies, and people begin to question, and your party may not know what this is about. And then those things can happen. They said you can do more or less as you want the pace to speed up. But like eventually this becomes something that the PCs realize this is like a big deal. Something's going on.
Right.
And then you kind of jump into where this adventure takes off. And then you find out, the apothecary's left town, and you trace it back to the merchant, and you find out what's going on and the whole thing. But I like that slow start, that kind of, we're talking today about, putting in lore. And one of the things that we'll be talking about is this idea of drip,
Yeah, right.
And I like this encounter because it gives you the ability to plan, okay, I'm going to need an encounter, and I don't know where it's going to go after this, this thing I've got going on now. Well, right in the middle of this thing you got going on now, drop in a watchman death. And then just as they're starting to end that, drop in another watchman death. And then, two more watchman death happens. And then you're ready to jump into this encounter, and your PCs are primed. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know. What do you think when you hear this story, this encounter?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, of just the idea of it like being a slow build into this, because I had a handful of questions when I read this, was kind of what popped into my brain more than anything. And like how to draw the PCs into this initially was one of those questions that I would, if I'm thinking about running this in my game, that's the question I'm asking to get them into it. And I do think like you could run a lot of these as one shots. And you could probably just be like, you're at a meal, you're at a feast, and a watchman drops dead.
Yeah.
And then drop them in. Or like, they come into a town and somebody's comes out screaming, the watchman's been killed, like kind of thing. And, and yeah, like, oh, you run in there and see what's going on, and that draws them in. But I definitely have the preference of that being they've seen little by little, okay, something is going on weird in this town with the watchmen. Why are they being killed off? And that can be a sense of suspense that comes into that. So I definitely like that. I love this specific encounter because it's one of those like peeling back the onion situations of there are so many layers the PCs can dig into, of like realizing, oh, this isn't just a one-off death. And then now that we've got into this, it's like, okay, somebody's killing them. We've kind of tracked down the reason that people are dying. Is it an apothecary? No, it's actually somebody who's buying something. And then you get to that, you get to the merchant, and it's like, oh, they're killing people and they've killed innocent people. So this is a problem, but also there's a greater justice problem that like we haven't even dug into yet. And that's got to be dealt with also, kind of situation. So I love that that's like, it continually unfolds as you go through this. And I think that's a good, that's a really good just principle even to like think about when you're like making your own encounters too, of, maybe it's not just point A to point B, but there's C and D and even E that like begins to unwrap as you dig into it. So I like that as even just an example of like how to do that. And I really like that they speak into, trying to remember how exactly they said it, but the like pacing of it, of, maybe you could add another watchman death, or you don't, depending on the speed of how the group is moving through this and what you're wanting to. And that's just another really good like point that they made kind of in the middle of that I was like, I really want to grab onto that for future things that I do, where it's like, okay, as I'm working through this, remember those things of,
Yeah.
That's something I think like we can make use of in sessions or adventures, whether it's, okay, there's another combat encounter that's obviously going to stretch this out, or there's another death of a watchman, or there's another situation to have those kind of X factor in there to be able to pace the game well. So that was cool to see that too.
And you could also, do that confounding thing where someone else dies. Maybe they were poisoned, but it's a different kind of poison, and it was just a one-off.
Yeah.
Somebody else was just mad at somebody else.
Yeah.
But for a while, you're thinking, okay, this is part of it, and then they have to tease out why it's not. And,
yeah, like if you ever watch, like a crime show or something, every now and then it's like, oh, like here's another death, and it ends up being like a copycat killer. It's like, oh,
right.
Well, we heard about this person poisoning, but this isn't, nightshade, this is arsenic, and then it's like, well, somebody obviously jumped in on this so that's even a way of making it wider and broader too in our games of like, okay, there's more things going on. It just got more complex and more detailed. There's another piece of an adventure that they can dig into, especially if they're like investigation type people. And that's something that like really stuck out to me is this is really good, I think, for anybody. But like if you had an alchemist in your party, or somebody who may be like apothecary or poisons or herbalists or whatever, who like that kind of skill situation, I think there's even a deeper kind of draw for that. Or, obviously investigative type people may like this kind of thing, and you can kind of jump into that with even like the lore that they're interested in. You mentioned that of, let's draw them deeper into the kind of type of characters they are. I think that could work really well for them.
Yeah. And not to mention, we didn't even kind of come to this, but this brings up kind of the moral character of your group at the end.
Right.
And you have to be prepared. It said generally good aligned parties will want to see everybody brought to justice across the board, but that may not be your party. Your party may be like, you know what, these guards, they have, maybe your party hates like all institutions and authority. And they're like, you know what, these guards deserved it because of what they were doing, even though many of the guards were not involved in it at all. And, we're good family men, if you play it that way. But they may choose to like, keep this guy secret, or to smuggle him out of the city, or to do one of 100 other things. And so be ready as a GM, because you never know which way that ball's going to bounce. Unlikely that they will say, you know what, we're not going to expose the captain of the guard, or we're not going to go fight him ourselves, or whatever it is they decide to do. That's less likely, because that's, he was the original bad guy, who ended up causing the death of the wife. And the death of a wife is like one of those things that maybe they resound with really well. Maybe one of their characters had a wife or a loved one killed by authority, and so they have this thing against authority anyway. So be ready for that. And it's kind of a neat place to put them in, so that they have to tease out, what do we do here?
Right. Yeah. I think that like, this is another side piece, but it always is a conundrum that I have to work through when it's like, okay, we're going to put possibly the players in opposition to the like entirety of the city guard, kind of thing. It's like, how is this going to get like,
and yet I found players are so ready to be in opposition to the entire city guard.
Oh yeah, they are, but
so ready.
It's a mechanical conundrum for me, because a lot of times it's like, okay, I feel like these 5 people should not be able to stand up against them, but then you have like, if we end up in a stand-up fight, like that could, kind of be a thing. And it's like, okay, you just wiped out the entirety of the city guard in this fight. Who's actually the good guy now? And but I guess they even speak to that. Yeah, there
has to be these consequences. Like, okay, so now there's like this orc tribe that comes and starts. Orc tribe, that's so cliche. Anyway, this orc tribe that comes and like starts to attack the city because there's no guard, and it's like the consequences of what you've done.
Right. Yeah.
So all these innocent people are now in trouble.
Yeah, we'll do a throwback and say were-rats. Were-rats now come up from the city and take over or the sewers, because
I say we go straight to were-sharks.
Were
I mean,
sharks.
why not? Where sharks
been
just come
waiting.
from everywhere.
Yep. They've been just waiting in the harbor for the city guard to fall.
Yeah, oh, man.
Love it.
Well, I tell you what, that's a good encounter, and hopefully you can take that and adapt that. It's kind of got a neat like a conundrum and a neat pacing, and so, some good things you could use in there. So hopefully that's useful.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead to our main idea for the day, and this is the idea of integrating lore.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, Adam.
Yeah. So, this is trying to get a little bit deeper of a dive into this idea. We've had some conversations where this has come up, and you mentioned, Matthew, that idea of like dripping, and we've talked through that idea. I think it's worth talking again, especially since this is a pre-record. It's going to be, a month from now when this actually lands, kind of thing. And it's going to have been
in these 2 episodes. We've got 2 more live episodes before this one drops. We're going to have such a hard time not saying, "Oh, like we said
before." Yeah. So give us some grace here, please. But we talked about some of this stuff, and I feel like the integration of lore into the setting is always going to be something that's part of these conversations. But just trying to go a little deeper into understanding maybe how we've done that, or some principles of just like how do we think about that, of trying to get lore into it and let the players like understand maybe some history, or maybe that kind of thing. So that's kind of the idea of the conversation today as we get into that.
And there's like, well, there's so much. Why don't you pick a place and kick us into this thing, and we'll just kind of explore around till we get it all.
Yeah. So a thing I've been thinking about, and I haven't done this. I didn't do this in my current game because of the way it started. And I was trying to think back at some of the other games that I've done, but I think there's a good like tool that we can use of like almost like a prelude kind of situation of setting the tone. I know this is done in a ton of places, but like I'm gonna go back to my typical looking at Lord of the Rings, the movies, and the movie starts out like our first like Fellowship of the Ring begins with Galadriel is talking about like the world is changing. I can feel it in the air. I can feel it in the waters, and begins to speak. And then there's even a point where there's like the explanation of like how the ring came to be and how it was lost and all the stuff. Like you get that kind of info. And I wonder like if I don't think you need to dump it all, obviously, but if like a setup like that leading into a campaign as we're like entering into that could be a helpful like tool. Have you ever done anything like that in your games as you're looking back on that?
Well, I was sitting thinking of some of the other games we have, and I feel like I don't know if I have ever done it, but I know that in some of our games that some of the various people have run, we would have like a paragraph or some paragraphs of you guys are part of this kingdom, and this is going on, and here's some of the history, and then this. I'm not coming up with any good specifics right now, so it's not very interesting. But I have seen that happen. I'm trying to think if I've done that. I know that for the Dormant Mind, I got like a little theme song that I kicked off every night with. That would have like a recap. So in my mind, the movie, I think Lost was the first place I remember really paying attention to it, where they'd go previously on Lost, and they would play the scenes from the past to kind of remind you of them that immediately was going to impact action that was probably going to take place now. And so it may have been something from like 5 episodes ago or last season or something. And they bring that one up. And as soon as you're reminded of that, you're like, oh yeah, and then you're kind of set up and geared for that. When I first started the very first campaign, I feel like there was something, I just kind of did this off the cuff every week, but I feel like I did some sort of little setup to start that said something and ended with the Dormant Mind, and just kind of set the tone. But that would have been a perfect place to do kind of what you were talking about, that they did it to Lord of the Rings, and kind of set the stage. I don't know that I've done that though too much, but I think that's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. And I would say, I actually had written down here mentioning you doing that. So it's interesting to me that you just brought that up, because I do feel like whether it was intentional or not, and I know you said like a lot of that was off the cuff with the way. Great recap option, by the way. Like I love to hear it that way. Always kind of looking for different ways for that recap to happen. But I feel like there would be lore moments that would come into that, whether it was meant to or not. Like I feel like I remember being like, oh, okay, and getting a little extra detail that maybe I hadn't thought about prior. So yeah, I like that a lot too. Of even just like the session opener, there being a ability to slip some extra lore pieces in. I've found myself doing that, and sometimes. So I'm chronically, just to let everybody know, chronically, I have a plan of like, I want these things to be said for sure, like one way or the other. I want it to be organic and stuff, but I really want this stuff to get told and or shown or spoken at some point. And I'll walk away from a session and immediately be like, dang it, it's like one massive piece of information just got skipped over somehow. And I've honestly taken to, it's not necessarily like big lore or anything like that, but even like details. There was I'm trying to remember how I fixed it, but I remember there being a specific thing that when the current group met this like avatar of this rogue god that wanted to try to turn them kind of to his side, I wanted a specific thing to be said that I forgot to say. But when I did the recap the next time, I just went ahead and slipped it in, you know, and it was like part of that's having the realization that I'm pretty sure this group is not going to remember everything that was said anyway. So it probably was just like, oh yeah, that was said, just unless notes were perfectly taken. But I think that idea of like the intro bringing in either like pieces that maybe were missed or just the good reminders, or here's an extra piece of lore is good. Kind of going back to that, like the prelude. Yeah. I think if I would have had a prelude to this game, I don't know. It's hard because there's so much that's been unveiled over time, but there's a piece of me that would love to have like had the background of there was once a war between the gods and the Titans, and these Titans were bound. Like that being something that maybe would have been, but now we're, way in the future from that. I kind of wish that would have had a backdrop of that, because I think certain things may have landed differently. But I've also really liked the like unveil of it going from, well, we interacted with this one weird line of energy. Oh, wait, there's more of them. Oh, wait, there's avatars of gods at the end of them. Oh, wait, they're all binding this thing. That's hard for me to know. You don't know what would have happened, kind of thing. But
this all goes back somewhat to the idea of how you create your campaign and how much organically blooms during the campaigns.
Right.
So I know that during this campaign for you, the whole idea of the ley lines wasn't there at the beginning.
Yeah, right.
And I know that with my game, The Dormant Mind, while I had a plan, that plan is radically different looking based on how gameplay happens. So you would have to have a pretty good idea of like where you were going to end things up and what exactly happens in there.
Right.
You'd have to have a little bit better of an idea to do a really good prelude like that. It's easier to look back now and say, oh, it would have been cool to do this.
Yeah.
What I do think we have to kind of differentiate between is world lore, player and group lore. Because I think what we're talking about here is a lot of world lore. And for me, a lot of that drops in game. They kind of find out as they go. But it would be cool if you had a good enough idea to start them with this tease, something. Because like with the Dormant Mind, I feel like I started you guys pretty basic. You were going to help a friend. That was really about the only background you had. Now with my Oracle of Order campaign, you guys in that first session, you met the Oracle and he gave you this prophetic poem that was an incredible, riddle of lore drop
Right. Yeah.
that you guys wouldn't figure out for a long time. And as you went through, some of those lines would become like, oh my goodness, that's what's happening right now with us.
Right.
Oh, these
Yeah.
two lines here, that's, we just did that. And, but it was that kind of a setting. That was probably the most I've ever done of that.
Right.
But I do like the idea of also thinking about like group lore. What kinds of things have happened in your past? And again, when you start a campaign, many of those things haven't even been thought of yet.
Right. Yeah.
They kind of get developed, and then people are like, "Oh, remember back when you and I, before in your current campaign, my character and a character named Pip were together."
Yeah, right.
And when we started this, I had no real idea of how that was together. And it's kind of, we make it up as we go, and we'll say
Right.
things, and we'll play and adjust to one another. And it's kind of made this feeling of, okay, if this whole party's in danger, I'm going to help this whole party. But first I help Pip, because Pip
Yeah,
and I
right.
have like a history. And when we drop some of those little lore things, even though we're kind of making them up as we go, that begins to weave into the story and bind us together even stronger. And I love that sort of thing.
sure.
We have in the past, and I'm sure most groups do this, not every group, because not every game does this, but to take time before a session starts and write a character with a backstory.
Yeah,
And
right.
we've had various mechanics of how we can get there to be connections between those players before it starts, and to write stories. And I think for me, the most successful campaigns are the ones, and I've said this before, where we've taken time to pour into and really kind of flesh out our character and our connections. And so I think we've had games where it's like, okay, two of you will have a connection to one another. And then we've done that where it's like different ones around the table have these connections. I want you to write your backstory, not just a bulleted list, but like write like a vignette of like your character, and then write a vignette of your character and this connection, and how that's happened.
Yeah.
And those sorts of things then give this lore that everybody has read, and it's in their minds as they move forward.
Yeah.
And then, more can be added to that by the group, but group lore and player lore, those things are going to be different. They're going to kind of be supplied to the GM often. I've had a player, say, hey, out of session, this is between sessions, say, hey, you know what? I wanted my character to have been, in, a traveling circus at some point, and he had like a really falling out with the fat lady. And because of that, there's this huge tension every time he sees a fat lady with a beard. And, and I don't know, making all this up, but they'll drop this like little thing that they want their character to have had to me personally. And then in game, we come across a fat lady with a beard, and they have some weird reaction, and it starts to come out because of that. So that's a way that player lore happens.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. You're talking about the ways that people connect, and I think one of my favorite ways that happened was with the like initial Dormant Mind group. That was when I remember writing specifically vignettes about like how I met people. Like there was one where one of the players like basically saved me from something, and I got to write that. And that was a really cool piece where I appreciate the like the agency as a player, but to be able to write, it's the history. So it was the history surrounding me as a character, but like, I got to develop some of that world in that realm, and for there to be even like the trust from a GM to say, hey, like create some stuff here.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really cool piece. And for us to be able, as GMs, whether we're brand new or have been doing it for a long time, like to create those spaces for the players to bring in, like that was a point. Like asking a player to create kind of came to mind when I was thinking about integrating lore, whether it's world or that like personal or group stuff, to give them space to make that happen.
We can forget as GMs that sometimes we get this idea that, oh, I'm going to be the GM. Okay, I've got to know everything and direct everything.
Right.
I am God in this game. And you forget, like, really the big part of running a game, I mean, you're going to have like monsters and plot, but you're facilitating, and you
Yeah,
really
right.
do want to like open that, and you don't have to be the one who comes up with everything. Some of
Right.
the joy is letting
Yeah.
people, your
Yeah,
players,
and
come up.
being able
Yeah.
to react to that. I more and more love, this isn't quite lore as much as setting, I guess. Excuse me. But recently, like, Torgan is a half orc barbarian in our crew, and he came across briefly a monastery that had been ruined, but it was like the place that had taken him in as an orphan. And even for some of that to be like, okay, what space, a question I asked him was like, what place in that was important to you in this monastery? This was like beforehand, but he gave me some of this info. And so when we got there and he like enters into the ruined monastery's doors and walks through the like chapel area and into the training facility, and then walks over to this closet door that he used to hide in as a teenage half orc, listening to everybody do their stuff, that was like him. That was him, and that was a really cool piece for me to be like, oh, that's awesome to like hear some backstory, to hear creativity in that. But also, I honestly got to walk into that space and not have to create. That saved me. That was efficient for me too as a GM, to like, I didn't have to create the look of this place because Ben had talked me through it, of what he saw. And I think there's some like really cool pieces. It's beautiful, but it's also like helpful, and it's that group building stuff. So I think there's some like lore pieces of that we can definitely, we want our group to be like building together, in that
And
way too.
encouraging your players to come up with lore about their characters will help many players who aren't very good at knowing how to build a character that's not flat. And I will say that, as we met that monastery, and Torgan had not been flat, but like he was a more one-dimensional character. He was strong and kind of
Yeah.
quirky, and he was always ready for a fight, and that's very typical. But then, like, as I hear some of the stuff that he said and some of the stuff that we learned there begin to be a more complex shape,
Yeah.
a more
Yeah.
3D shape to that character for me. And we have to remember that playing the game is not just about like winning. It's not just about overcoming at the end. It's about expressing our complex characters
Yeah. Yeah.
in
Yeah,
game.
absolutely.
And so having them come up with lore on their own, and sometimes you have to do that as an assignment. You give them assignment. Hey, I
Yeah.
want you to come up with, like, you've done this to me. You said to me, hey, I want to know about your family. And I think that might be all you said. But I
Yeah.
remember sitting down thinking, oh, in my mind, I was just this character who's out fighting. I fly and I shoot. I blow
Right. Yeah.
things away at a distance. And that was kind of and then so I started thinking, okay, well, what is my family? And I had to think about, like, okay, I have this older brother that always got all the attention. And I kind of felt like our father just didn't care about me and the younger brother, and I had to take care of the younger brother. And this is why I joined the Thieves Guild, because I'm trying to make sure that he has what he needs, because our father is giving all of his money to make sure this older brother goes through the
Yeah. Yeah.
magistrum, the school of magic, whatever.
Mhm.
And so I found that I was a character who was looking for my father's approval. I was a character who like had this competition begrudging against my older brother. And I felt like this caregiver to my younger brother, which gave my GM a lot of room to say, okay, how am I going to mess with you and your older brother and like change that, or let
Yeah.
that relationship change? Also, how can I take your younger brother, who you haven't seen in a while, who has now been kidnapped and is gone?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
can I play with that? And now your father that you're you hate, but you're also looking for his for his affirmation. And so
Yeah.
you giving me that assignment is the whole reason that I came up with any of that lore. But then that made my game much deeper and
Yeah.
gave the game a lot more places to go. So as a GM, sometimes giving simple assignments to your players to say, I want you to come up with, how did you meet this person you travel with and begin fighting with?
Yeah.
You guys say you were together. I want you to tell me the story, and then
Yep.
get that to me during the week, and then I will begin to bring that lore out that you helped create as we go through the game.
Yeah. Yeah. I love you brought that up, and I don't want to go too deep in because next episode is integrating player backstories into the game. So
Oh,
I don't want to go too much, but you hit a lot of that, but it was that was one of those that was like above and beyond expectations for me, even like asking that question, because that, so I think about the 8 types of fun. I
right.
know that you, Matthew, would not be content. Just all we do is you fly around and shoot a hand cannon at people, and that then we move on to the next thing, and you fly around, and you like that, but it's not like that's not
Right.
going to grip you to just be doing that all the time. There needs to be more. So wanting to ask questions of you because of that, but then again, efficiency stuff for me. Um, suddenly there is a mages college in the world because your older brother went to it instead of you and your father, and so it's like, okay, well, now I get to like build out that, and that became a location for you all. And you have this younger brother who you care about a lot and take care of, and also has been overlooked. Well, that gives me a chance to have him kidnapped and taken, away. And that becomes another like arc of the story. And yeah, I mean, you were hitting on that, but it's amazing what something like this game has been awesome for me, because a practical joke played by a character on another character became the game in a lot of ways, like the overarching thing. And asking a single question created locations and like honestly like two what I would consider arcs of the story,
Mhm.
with a lot of other stuff happening, but like that's drawn through that. And I just love group creativity in these
Yeah.
ways, and like being able to bring that in. So
And
yeah.
there's something for the player that when they recognize,
Mhm.
hey, this thing I came up with is part of the story.
Right.
That's satisfying for
Yeah,
a
yeah,
character.
yeah, for
So,
sure. A couple like maybe more active things before we kind of jump towards our NPC, that I wanted to be sure to say is, I do think like if we're doing a lore drop or drip, and trying to integrate that into the setting, that even if it's like world bigger historical lore, that when we're giving it, that it actually connects to the PCs, or um, at least one of them in a way. And what I mean by that is like, okay, so they're like, digging through the library of this ancient wizard, looking at books, and it's like, well, what is this book, about? And if you're trying to drop something, that it's not just some random piece of information about the history of the world that you love because you made it, but it actually has to do with something they're going to encounter, or something that their character is connected to, or at least like again pushes the story forward. I have a tendency when I've like made things, sometimes it's like, oh, these is sweet details about my world that really have no bearing on anything, but I really want to tell somebody about it, and then it comes out and it's like, okay, cool, that's going to get thrown in my bag and not ever thought about again. I think it's important to
yeah.
still consider the ties, that bind those together, whether it's specifically about the path of the game or specific to the PCs, can be a help. Um,
I wrote a few things about dropping world lore, and I kind of got
mhm.
off on like the things we were talking
Yeah.
about. But one of them is this idea that you're going to have some lore, and I think what got me off track was I never had like that big prelude
Hmm.
lore,
Hmm.
but I do have lore, and I drop it, and I had to think about like some questions of who's going to drop that, when are they going to drop it, why are they going to
Right.
drop it, and how are they going to drop it? Those very original questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how.
That's good.
But like the who. For me, was very much what you were just talking about. There's going to be some things that are just small history, and the people who drop that lore are random NPCs that you
Mhm.
just don't care about too much.
Yep.
It could be the guy you met in some backwater tavern who just says this thing and it's
Yeah.
interesting, and now you know this about the world.
Mhm.
But if it's going to be something that is bigger and more like actively as far as what they're going to be encountering and doing, then that will probably be a character that becomes more sticky, or at least is remembered
Yeah.
more.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think back to my Dormant Mind campaign, and part of my thinking of lore was when. So I didn't do it at the beginning. I decided kind of consciously not to make the first thing you guys dealt with
Yeah.
the big thing of the world. I wanted it to feel like it was a small thing that led you guys to a bigger place. And then you begin to realize there's more
Right.
prophetic epicness involved. And so I didn't make it first, but I made it soon. And I tried to like sprinkle through places where you would just stumble upon like bigger glimpses of the picture
Right.
going on.
Right.
So you guys went to this dream sanctuary at some point to get back the last dreams of the youngest
Yep.
child of the emperor who was killed. And in doing so, you begin to see a little bit more about what was going on in the world. Maybe
Yeah.
you met Arafel at one point, and she like opened some big lore about like there's some shadow things coming, and the world is going to change, and there needs to be, so there was prophecy sort of kicked off, and you guys had more. You guys met a hag at one point who
Yeah. Sure.
began to tell you that there was this world wound, and in this world wound there's some Sarkonian prophecies that I really want if you can get them. And this
Right.
world wound, you begin to think like, what caused this world wound, and it began to tie in more. And especially when she got the prophecies back, some of what you found out propelled you on. You guys met
Yeah,
this
right.
ancient skald who basically like told you about a lot of what happened up north, which included the emperor and some of his choices. And you begin to find out about this demon Kastichthi that they dealt with, and these lore drops. And so when I had to think about like these bigger lore drops, like the hag was a little bit more of a sticky character, and you guys remember her a little more permanently than you do some of those small people
Yeah,
who just dropped
right.
like some history of the world. Same thing when you get to Arafel. Obviously, she's very much remembered because she's a god, a goddess.
Yeah. Right.
And then the ancient skald, even though you've only had a couple interactions with him, I think he would stick in your mind more. So these NPCs who drop the bigger bits of lore are going to be more sticky. And so you think about if I'm dropping this much lore, let's put a little more thought into this character and what they're like and where they came from and what they're, so as a GM, I don't just kind of grab this kind of NPC and say, okay, this is the one that says it with no thought to who that person is.
Right.
I put a little more effort into knowing a little more of their backstory so that it feels real, right? Because the why matters. Am I just propelling them a little bit further in this story, or am I doing more to propel like their campaign, or am I just giving them a sense of history and realism? That all is part of why you drop lore.
Yeah.
And so,
For sure.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, you said propel on or propel forward a couple times, and I do think that's like a really good motivation, to like be thinking through. A thing that I like to do and have liked to do more often lately is when there is lore given for it not to even go to all the players at once. I think there's like some complexity for the party that can happen, and maybe everyone's just like, oh yeah, I learned this, here you go, and it gets shared, but that gives an opportunity for there at least to be like role play of that being shared, or a role play of I'm going to hold this to myself for a while, kind of thing. And
right.
I get to see that too, where even if that's just like I am enjoying the fact that I have some insider knowledge that maybe I can pull out at a certain point, or I'm holding this because I'm not sure if I trust everybody, or those kind of things like that. That's been a cool piece of just like allowing some people, especially if it's more specific to them, like this is a thing that's, in our game, we have a character that's Drow, and as he goes into the Drow city, he obviously should know more about the lore and history of that city than the random guy who lived in a monastery or the guy who was a city guard for a long time who never has been in the Underdark. Like they shouldn't know that lore, and there's opportunities for him then to share more in that. So I like that too. And a thing that's just like a personal thing. I don't know, think everybody has to do this, but I try to be intentional about dropping some hint of lore in every session, even if it's not like some gigantic thing, but that every session there is something, somebody says something, they make a statement that is like hopefully something that will create curiosity about, oh, there's something else out there that I could learn. And I try to make that a note in the way that I make notes of try to get this slipped in somehow, whether it's like even a knowledge check of somebody sees something, a relic, and they're like, I want to make a knowledge check about that. And it's like, well, you succeeded. And like, maybe you like read a book at some point, I think it can even come out that way of like, you read this random book at some point that mentioned this, and now things are starting to click together a little more now that you've seen this. Or if that doesn't happen, people aren't asking for those kind of investigations, then it's like, well, this bard is singing about this, or the avatar of the god shows up and is speaking to them in a dream, or, those kind of things. I like to have something intentionally said every game. And again,
which is something that you would have to be intentional about. You can write down what lore can I, because I haven't always thought about that. Sometimes I'll just be like, okay, here's our session. And I do think that is an important thing as a GM to sit down and say, what's it going to be this week? Just a little tidbit.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right. Yeah. And also saying I'm not perfect at that and fail often. So,
aren't we all not perfect?
Yeah, it's okay. But yeah.
Well, hey, I want to kind of put a wrap on this. We are going to be talking about character backstories coming up here soon. And I kind of jumped into that a little early. Let's go on to our NPC and see what we've got there today. And we're going to keep this episode a little shorter and not have haversack questions at the end of this. But who's our NPC this week, Adam?
This is a Marguerite Rousseau. She's a reformed criminal. She says, I do miss the excitement of the old days. She's a handsome, petite woman whose best days are just behind her. Her curly red hair has touches of gray. She's retired long ago, and she's bored. She jumps at any chance to relive her glory days. She's genuinely pleasant and enjoys her luxurious lifestyle, but she misses her carefree days as a burglar. She wants to relive her past by doing just one more job. She's a reformed criminal and only takes jobs that aid the less fortunate or involve the return of stolen property. Marguerite Rousseau, in quotes, used to be Renee St. Cowan, a poor child brought up in a religious orphanage and given the saint's name as her surname. Unfortunately, war soon came and the king took money anywhere he could find it, including the coffers of the orphanage. Renee took to stealing to help, burglaring noble mansions, secretly giving her scores to the orphanage as anonymous donations. When the orphanage finally had to close its doors, the young Renee joined the Thieves Guild and became an adventurer. Those were the best days of her life. After the last group disbanded, Renee was left with enough money to purchase a small barony. She changed her name and settled down. Still, she misses the old days, and it takes little to convince Marguerite to put her skills to use one more time. So, Marguerite Rousseau.
I like Marguerite. I like the idea that she's older. I like that she's got the gray in her hair, and that she looks back as those were the best days, and like there's this desire to do it again, but she's old. She's older, and I like the idea of maybe my party finding out, meeting her, and then somehow realizing, wait a minute, this is the one from all the stories we've heard. This Saint Cowan, whatever her name was, I don't have it here in front of me. Renee St. Cowan. Anyway, like realizing, wait a minute, we've heard about you. You were amazing. And then like her kind of being pulled in by that. And my vision is that she decides to throw in one last time. And she is maybe trying to pick a lock, and she's like, oh, this arthritis, it's just not the same as it used to be. I got to take some leave tonight, not leave maybe. Or she's like hanging from a rope, and she's like, I just don't know how I ever like did this for hours. And she's like constantly making these comments about like, But like at the same time, there's this joy in it. But she realizes this, I can't continue doing this.
Yeah.
But maybe she can help out in something. I like that kind of idea.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that connection that you can have there. I love the idea of like, as you know, way back when we talked about posture and voicing and all that kind of stuff, and I think there's got to be an eagerness of her to like, oh, your adventures, like tell me more about what's going on. What's the score you're on right now? You got any room for this? Kind of like to like try to get just in there and like really be just interested.
And maybe she can even like think of some things and make the party think of things that they would normally not have planned for because she's so like experienced. And
For
she
sure.
brings up this stuff and they're like, oh, never thought about that.
Oh yeah. That's actually a good, if you have people that are maybe struggling. You brought up the Tinker last time, that like way back, I guess several episodes ago now, but about like struggling with kind of the just how do you actually do this in game. That could be a way, if you bring like an expert in this way, she's the expert rogue, maybe the rogue's having issues. It's like, well, let me walk you through how to deal with some of these persnickety locks over here. And I think that'd be kind of funny to see.
And somebody like her
as well.
It would be fun for them to even like say, you young, new, rogues, thieves out here, you think you know it all. There's still so much to learn.
Yeah.
I'm going to mentor you. And like maybe sessions, occasionally she will like send a message. It's like, I've noticed some very conspicuous asking about in town. Please calm that down.
Right.
As a rogue, as a thief. Just kind of always being that voice in the background, even after that one last fling is over, she could be there. But yeah, it's kind of fun seeing this like more mature, but was great in her time, still on the edge of that. But,
there was one final thing I thought of with her for me, and is this idea of like using her story and her to be in the game as a way to even get the PCs thinking about their quote retirement. It's like, I don't think we think about that. I don't think about that a lot as far as like when I'm a player of like, oh, what's this going to look like in the middle of it? I'm not thinking about like, what's it going to be like when,
when I retire
and, or when I'm done, when this is all over, what's it going to look like? And I think her even like reminiscing or talking in that way could be a piece to help them like even role play out some of that stuff. So I thought that was,
that's one thing in one game I had when you guys got to the end. Of course, we didn't think about it all the way through. We're fighting, but when we got to the end, we did like an epilogue where you guys all wrote like years later, and that's when Eric's character was rooming with Rolo, and it just there was hilarity, but also this kind of like closure of this is where later in life in their comfortable years they ended up, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah,
so right.
That's awesome. I like her.
All right. Well, hey, that's going to be it for us today. Like I said, we're not having Haversack questions, but we're so glad that you joined us today. And we are going to have, again, not next week, but the following week, we're going to have an episode drop, and then it's going to be every other week for 3 sessions here. Yeah. And then we'll be back to our normal schedule and live. So thank you so much for joining us and sticking with us, even as we have to go through this little bit of a different time here on Rise of the GM. We'll see you guys next time, where we are going to talk about tying in PC's backstories.
Right. Yep.
All right. Thanks for watching, guys.